hello to Sharon Healy-Yang, who is with us today to talk about her Jessica Minton mysteries and life and historical fiction and everything.
Whatever you want to know.
Yeah.
Almost.
So you started out as an English professor.
Yeah, I taught at Worcester State University for 20 years. I was in the English department. My main specialties were Shakespeare and 19th century British. But then I also did film and lit because I'm a huge film buff and I'm self-taught pretty much in film. But I did a lot of reading. My nephew is a filmmaker, so he schooled me a little bit. And, I grew up watching film noir and the Universal horror films and Val Lewton's films. So that really colors my way of looking at, it affects how I write because I'm a very visual writer. So I try to recreate on the page the images that you would see if you were watching a film. And I've gotten that response from many of my readers saying, yeah, it's kind of like reading an old movie. There's the chiaroscuro you have and the use of shadow and darkness in your descriptions, and the hinting showing rather than telling, or hinting rather than telling. So all of that, shaped me as a writer as well as a teacher. In fact, the latest book, Always Play the Dark Horse, and there's the dark horse, actually takes place at a small women's college. It's set in 1946. So it takes place at a small women's college that I made up and located on the Long Island Sound in Connecticut. In fact, what it is if anyone has ever been to the Avery Point campus of the University of Connecticut, it's beautiful. In fact, the descriptions you see are very much what it looks like. And there's a wonderful sort of mini chateau called Branford House because it used to belong to, it wasn't Mr. Branford, I forget what the guy's name was, but it was donated first to the Coast Guard and then later to the University of Connecticut. And so this gorgeous mini chateau I went there a few times and I said, oh, this would be the best setting for a novel. So the Great Hall you see in there, the seminar rooms with all the carvings, the stone spiral staircase, the sort of warren of offices upstairs, that's all in that house. So if COVID lifts enough and you go there, you can actually see what it was like. And it's on the ocean.
I love that house.
And there's also a really nice small art gallery on the second floor, which is what I turned into the English department of my novel. But it was just a perfect inspiration for my novel. So you can kind of see literature and art and education all coming together there.
And you were writing while you were still an English professor.
Yeah, I've been writing since I was 8 years old. I mean, the first thing I ever wrote.
Publishing.
Yes, not publishing. No. Actually, I didn't get published until I was 58 in 2015. So you can do the math and figure out I'm 64. The first book I published was Bait and Switch. So it's the first novel in the series. And it was originally the first draft I ever wrote of that I completed in 1980. So for years, I was trying to get published. And I was quite often came this close. Part of the problem was when I first wrote this, it was the 1980s and it was set in the 40s and it was too soon to be considered historical. And then around the time you had like Janet Matetsky and all of a sudden I can't think of the other writers, but there are a lot, Reese Bowen, who were writing in the stuff took place, Catherine Miller, take place in the 30s and 40s and 50s. Mm-hmm. Then I was actually ahead of the wave, but they opened the door more for me because at that point, by the time you got to the 90s and the aughts, it was historical. The 40s were historical. So yeah, I was writing this when I constantly wrote. And even though I was getting rejected, often with positive rejections, I just kept writing. So I kept improving this bait and switch. And then the second novel, which is Letter from a Dead Man, I continued, I worked on that and revised that. And then I, kept going. By the time Letter from a Dead Man was published, I was already working on Always Play the Dark Horse. But what would happen is during the school year, I was so busy, I had no time to write at all. So I would write in the summer. So it would be teach like crazy from September to May, and then May, maybe take half, sometimes I would do my scholarship then, and then I would have until August, maybe the middle of August, to work on my writing. So it might take me 3 years to write a first draft. But then I noticed when I worked on, I have a fourth novel in this series that is just, in rough draft form. And that took me after I was retired, and that took me from September through February to write. So you see, when I'm not teaching, wham, that's my job. But when you're teaching, you just don't have time, and you're mentally exhausted. I just couldn't handle it. So yeah, but I would say in some respects, some of the teaching influenced Always Play the Dark Horse. This is set in 1946, so a lot of the rules we have now about tenure, about protection through the Union, about your personal life don't apply. So I had to go back and really talk to people who were teaching back then, or read about what was going on back then to kind of adapt it. But the fact that there was backstabbing sometimes and politics going on, that never changes. So that
I used to be an English professor. You're so right.
You know what I mean? Yeah. So yeah, that's kind of how it all worked together. But I have to say, a lot of my colleagues supported me in my writing. Oh, excuse me.
Has she read yet?
No.
Oh, okay.
Hello, Robin.
I'm just trying to shut off the phone, but nothing seems to work. So, yeah, I mean, I have to say, a lot of my students still support me. They will come to the readings, and I remember when Bait and Switch first came out, just before it was released, I should say. I got the picture for the cover, which my husband designed. He does all of my covers. And so I showed it to my creative and critical thinking class, and they were all excited, and they were asking me questions about it. And a bunch of them said, I want to know what's in that package. So it was kind of fun. There was a lot of support. And actually, in Always Play the Dark Horse, you have a lot of teachers who are very dedicated. And I did take some time to take some digs at people who think things like, oh, I was on a 4-4 load, so it would be 3 hours a week for 4 classes. And people would say sometimes, oh, so you only work 12 hours a week? So I took a dig at that. I always tell my students, the time I spend working with you in class is the least onerous of all the work I do. So I got back a little bit at some of the prejudices or misunderstandings people have about what it is to be a teacher.
So how did you come up with the character of Jessica?
Well, as I said, I'm an old movie buff, and I have my favorites. So my very favorite actress out of all the 40s was Joan Bennett. I love her because she's got a really snappy comebacks. She's smart. She plays strong women. She doesn't take guff from anybody. And she's funny, but she also is very warm too. So I thought I'd like to write a movie. I'd like to write a book where I'm casting her in it. In fact, one of the things I do, which is kind of weird, is on how to start writing. I have lots of movie books and I have collections of photos and things. So whenever I look at a picture, my brain wants to make a story about that picture. So I would look through the pictures and then I would describe the vignette and I'd think, okay, this is how I can pull it all together and create a story. So I thought of, I cast her, that smart talking gal, in that role. And I have to admit, there's a bit of myself in there too. Not the part about that I'd ever actually help fight fifth columnists. I mean, if somebody handed me a package and said, there are Nazis around, don't tell anybody, hold on to this till I can take it. No matter what they said, I would, beeline to the FBI, here guys, you handle it. But, I guess that's the MacGuffin, as Hitchcock would say, where you have somebody do something that people normally wouldn't do. But then you have to try to make your characters believable in every other aspect so the readers forget about that. So that really is where I got the idea for Jessica. And her sister, I really enjoyed writing the relationship with her sister. So I cast her sister as Rosalind Russell because I thought, right, wouldn't that be a great movie? Two of the fastest, smartest gals. And the relationship between them, I actually based on my relationship with my sister-in-law, because we're always teasing each other. She always thinks she knows better than I do about everything. Although she's mellowed over the years, and I'm always fighting back, although I've mellowed over the years. But we really love each other. And so actually we have a relationship like my two cats, sort of, sometimes it's whack on top of the head, but you really love each other. And we're always wisecracking with each other. And I could see, given the circumstances, we really would have a lot of Lucy and Ethel moments, which I like to work into my stories. So, and other people who are sisters have said to me, oh, that's like me and my sister. So I think it must have worked. A lot of it is, again, it's kind of fun because it helps me cast the parts, because I think of different actors or actresses. And, so I get a rhythm of how they speak and what they would say and what kind of, how they would react and what they would look like. So that helps me make it more concrete. And then at some point, the character just sort of takes over. So it isn't exactly like that person, but, there's enough of what you could have seen and experienced. So the character seems real to you.
Mm-hmm. So who would play James Crawford?
Oh, well, I usually don't tell people this, but since you guys are special, I'll let you know. Not someone you would expect, not someone from the 40s. When I was writing this novel, I was thinking, since I love Joan Bennett, who would be my premium guy? Well, since I was a teenager, I had a huge crush on the guy who played the flute in the Moody Blues. So I said, Ray Thomas. So, so it's kind of odd, but he really kind of in some ways stands in physically, not when he had really long hair, but when it was medium. And I really liked him because he seemed to have a very sort of sardonic sense of humor, but he also was very romantic. I liked his looks. And again, I sort of based on what I could see through the music. And then as usual, the character kind of took off on his own. And a lot of the relationship between James and Jessica, especially since I got married, I have to admit, I think comes out of my own marriage. Not that my husband was a former SOE agent that I know of. But I mean, sort of the way that they can kid back and forth, or sometimes, they get cranky with each other. And, but because they love each other and they're grown-ups, they work it out. I mean, this is one of the things that kind of irritates me sometimes in a lot of novels is people seem to think that you have to have characters over like 8 books struggling with their relationship. And, in real life, if we had to struggle that long, whether does he or she love me, it would be, see you later, alligator, that kind of thing. So I wanted to write something that I would enjoy about a couple who love each other and work together. And yeah, sometimes get a little prickly with each other, but that's life. That's how things go. So that's, I don't know if I disappoint you with my view of who James is, but that was, I don't know if you're saying, who the hell is she talking about? Probably that. But that was just how I worked them out and developed their characters.
So the story, this is the third book so far.
Yes.
Can you give us a little bit of background, and then we'd like to hear something from them?
Okay. Jessica and James are married now. He is struggling a bit with memories of the war. He has an opportunity. When he wasn't overseas, he had a cover working in this country, teaching at a college. I made up a college in New York, Washington, Irving University, because I love Washington Irving. But now, the person who had that job has come back and looks as if he wants his job back. So he's going to be out of work, but he has this opportunity to teach at this college, women's college on Margaret Point. And so he and Jessica are going there for the summer. Fortunately, a very close friend of hers works there, Rose Nyquist, and she's in the same department. So James is going to go back there, and it looks as if this is going to be great. Jessica's going to get some R&R from working on a radio program. James is going to work at a job he loves. But before they're in this cottage that had belonged to this young woman professor who had disappeared mysteriously. And while they're there, they discover her dead body washed up on the beach. Now, if that's not enough, one of the other people in the English department is a former boyfriend of Jessica's from her college days. And also of interest, there is an actual dark horse, this beautiful black horse that she sees a troubled veteran riding up and down the beach. And she befriends him to the consternation of not James, well, James to some extent too, other people. And on top of that, James has a secret. The horse has just shown up at her house alone with the saddle slipped late at night. This is the same eve after she and James had found the dead body on the beach. And James is still, what is he doing? He isn't back at the house yet. So she's, actually, no, this is a couple of days later. James has gone into New York to check with his superiors because things are getting a little suspicious about the body. So Jessica is alone at night in the cottage. She's fallen asleep and she wakes up suddenly when the horse shows up. And so she figures there's got to be something wrong because there's a horse with a slipped saddle. She figures something has happened to the rider and she's going to go take the horse back to try to figure out what happened to him. So she's ridden down the beach. She hasn't found him. She thought he's injured. And she comes up, rides up off the beach into where you can see the cottage, the house the shack he has. The barn didn't come into sight until Jess crested the rise aboard.
Sharon,
oh,
let me interrupt you just a moment. All we
Yes.
can see of you in the video is your hat tilted down over your head. You can't see you at all.
All right, I'll try. How's this? Is this better?
That's much better.
Okay. The barn didn't come into sight until Jess crested the rise aboard Blackie. There it was directly ahead, a small affair, only big enough for 1 or 2 stalls and storage of tack and feed. It stood a ways back, its door snugly closed. Jessica pulled up Blackie to take in the whole compound. The barn directly ahead with a little paddock and feed and water troughs, a wood shingle roof and weathered clapboards. The roof extended over a wood planked porch at the front. I'm sorry, she's looking at the cottage. Light shone through the window looking onto the porch and through the open front door. Open. Jessica scanned the flat area around her. Nothing, no one, no sounds but the tide, not even insects. Still as a graveyard in the moonlight. Lousy metaphor, that. She started to call Phil's name, but stopped. If he was silent because he was unconscious, what was the use? That's the reason she kept her trap shut, she told herself. Jessica's eyes returned to the door opening into the cottage. A quick glance at the barn again, back to the cottage. No, if she were injured, she'd aim for the house to collapse in. Besides, the barn was shut. Okay, son, Jess said more quietly than she'd expected. Let's check things out. She urged Blackie over to the house at a walk. Her hesitation was only minuscule before she slipped out of the saddle and bobbled, thinking, phew, it's a longer way down than I thought. Jess tied Blackie's reins to one of the porch supports, then instructed him, don't you go anywhere. Blackie nuzzled her in moral support before Jessica turned and strode to the doorway. Leaning on the doorframe, she surveyed the one-room digs Phil Novak called home, hoping to find him within. No one. An overhead light shielded by a tin cone illuminated the room harshly. On the far wall of the cabin, an open door revealed part of a claw-footed tub. At least Phil had indoor plumbing. The floors of the cabin had once been snugly planked, but weathering had warped them. Rugs were scattered about to keep out drafts. Phil hadn't been so lucky with the sand trapped or blown in. Yep, every light in the place was on, but no one was home. Something was really off here. Jess cast a glance back at Blackie, who seemed at ease. That reassured her a little. So what now, with no Phil Novak in sight in his house looking like something left behind by the lost colonists of Roanoke Island? She hadn't found an injured Phil between here and her place, so he probably wasn't hurt, at least by being thrown. With no sign of a struggle in here, Jessica didn't think he'd been carried off by Zodestruck's crew. Maybe he'd left a note behind somewhere. Jess stepped into the room, automatically closing the door behind her and calling, Phil, Mr. Novak, are you here? Are you hurt? Nothing. Funny, somehow calling out made her feel less of an intruder. Jessica found herself next to the desk, strewn with papers and open envelopes. Her hand went forward, but she stopped. Snooping into a guy's mail was intrusive, but definitely. Wasn't it also a federal offense? Anyway, she'd probably just mess up clues that James would need to look into. She'd certainly revealed that someone had been poking around Novak's stuff. Yet wasn't this a prime opportunity to look for that special package Phil was holding for Zodestruck? A package you wouldn't recognize if you fell over it. Maybe Phil was even now handing his secret what's-it over to that Nazi rat, leaving his door open, his lights blazing, and his horse running wild while he did it. None of this added up. Maybe she should stop looking for deep, dark secrets and concentrate on the most down-to-earth explanation. Phil had gone off in search of Blackie after the horse had somehow gotten away. As much as she thought she knew what went on between Phil and the horse, she could have been dead wrong. Blackie could have been spooked by a passing car on the lonely road and taken off. Maybe the smart move would be to leave Phil a note that she had his horse. Decision made, Jess grabbed a pen off the desk, scanning for a piece of blank paper. Nothing. She'd have to write on the back of one of these envelopes, which gave her the perfect excuse to check them and see they were just a bunch of bills and something from the VA. Darn. Well, wouldn't you know, know it, this pen wouldn't write. Damp sea air. Perfect excuse to open one of the drawers and look for another. But Jessica didn't. Someone knowing she'd only left a note here was one thing, but evidence of her poking through the desk suggested she'd been sticking her nose where it didn't belong. Jess scowled, glancing up at the wall above the desk, for the first time noticing the pictures tacked there. A few shipmates filled with a guy resembling him holding the head of a horse in the winner's circle at Rockingham Park. The horse wasn't Blackie, though. Phil was a lot younger and a lot happier. The picture had been taken 11 years ago, long before his brother had died, before a world war had shot a ship out from under him, before he'd gotten mixed up with this prize bunch. Phil had caught more than his share of tough breaks. What was he catching right now? Jessica paced across the room, thinking hard what to do. Too bad one of those pictures hadn't been signed, "Thanks for being a swell henchman, your pal, Georg Zodestruck." She was standing next to the counter now, tapping her fingers. Stay or go. If Phil had been hurt in a riding accident, she'd have found him. Who knew when he'd be back, or if he'd be back alone? Then again, Could he be in the barn? No, that made no sense. He'd hardly have shooed off Blackie, then locked himself in there. But someone could have driven off the horse and taken care of Phil in the barn. Blackie was snorting and pawing outside. He even let out a nervous whinny. Phil? No, Blackie wouldn't have sounded so rattled, so defensive. Good grief, maybe whoever approached was no friend at all. And here I am in a big open room with no back door. Blackie was really antsy now, but at this angle, Jessica couldn't see why through the window. I'm sorry. This angle, Jessica couldn't see why through the window over the desk. Could she duck into the bathroom? No time. The counter, only the counter. Scowling at the hand dealt her, Jess dashed behind the counter, barely pausing to grab the cast iron skillet. A gal never knew when denting a Nazi noggin might become imperative. Crouching behind the counter, she gnawed her lip and prayed that the Gene Krupa drum solo her heart was pounding out couldn't be heard by anyone but herself. What she wouldn't have given to tuck herself neatly into the cabinets under the counter, but no reducing plan could do that trick. What was she going to do? This invader only had to round the corner and she'd be sunk. Why hadn't she sat tight at home and waited for James? Why did she have to be such a 14-carat do-gooding sap? That was when Jess noticed that Blackie had settled down. Had Georgie boy slipped him a lunk of sugar with a Mickey Finn? Shouldn't the unnamed visitor have reached the door by now? What was he waiting for? Something was fishy. Jess gripped her frying pan tighter, almost wishing it were over. Jessica, you know I can see you right through this window. And that's where I'm leaving you. Oh, good. I like this. You all like
Yeah.
You have to read the book to see who was there. What happened to Phil
Mm,
Oh, too funny.
and Blackie?
yes,
Of course.
I know. I know.
You know, because
Right.
Don't tell them.
she just did.
Any
Oh, that was
So, Robin and Claire, do you have any questions for Sharon?
well, she's answered a lot of them already,
Oh.
Yeah, it was
except who it was outside the window.
and it was a good selection to read because you've got so many different aspects in there. You got the element of the German connection. You got some really good similes in there and things like that. It just had so many neat elements to it, and I could follow along and see it happening. And I love the bit about the frying pan because
Oh,
man,
good.
that's heavy. You
And the
hit
Gene
someone
Krupa
with
drum
one of those,
solo.
they're gonna feel it.
Oh, I'm so glad that works, because I'm so tired of movies and books where the heroine just faints. I mean,
Hmm.
I don't even know anyone who's ever fainted, unless they were pregnant or they hadn't had enough to eat,
Well, I think women used to faint because they were in these corsets and they couldn't breathe well.
Well, that makes sense, yeah.
Yeah.
That would make sense in Victorian novels.
Yes.
But yeah, I wanted to, and I noticed one of the things I liked about Joan Bennett in her movies is that, again, she didn't faint. And I mean, one of the movies, she's kicking Nazis in the shins and she's yelling for help. And, that's what I like in a woman. Someone
She's
who-
an action woman. She's a strong woman.
Exactly.
Live woman.
Yeah.
I like your use of the word sap.
Okay. But
so-
it's really
so
a 40s word.
Yeah, it is completely.
Well, one of the ways I get the language is, first of all, my parents, this is when they were young people in their 30s, 20s and 30s. So they still use that language. So, maybe not all the time, but, I would hear it enough. And then as I said, I'm a movie buff. And also I love reading mysteries that were written in the 30s and 40s and 50s. So part of what I did was I started a collection. Some of it is in my head, but some of it is I have collections of slang, and I group them under positive and insults and all this stuff. And so I just worked them into the discussion. And I even sort of picked ones for certain people, like Jessica's sister Liz is always saying, "For the love of Mike." And so And Jessica has a lot of for Pete's sakes, and yeah, she uses sap a lot. And one of the things that was fun was I was watching British movies written in the 40s. And so I pulled a lot of slang out of there for James. And because his background is kind of interesting. I mean, he actually came from a working class background, and he was a scholarship boy. So with Jessica, sometimes he slips into some slang that is more working class. Like she's the only person, I don't know why this is saying, this is doing this. You know, with Jessica, he might use slang like bloke, but he won't use that with, you know, with other people, because most of his life he's been trying to fit in. And so I also did a little tip of the hat to literature, because I talk about him coming from Milton Northern, which only exists in Elizabeth Gaskell's novel North and South, which is my favorite Victorian novel.
It's a great
And
book.
you know that one? Yeah.
Yes, I do.
And at some point I mentioned him having, I don't know if it's in this novel or elsewhere, going to school on the Thornton Scholarship, which is the name of the one of the mills, the main character's mills. You know, so I have the British slang too in there too as well. So that, and it was kind of fun to work that in. And occasionally I would have Jessica using it sort of like, well, as my husband would say, or as James was wont to say. So that was fun. I like doing the slang.
Does the music of the period play in at all in terms of when you're writing, or when you're preparing to write, or when you're just trying to sit and contemplate how to phrase something that, you know, do you use that at all?
I might not use it like in the background when I'm writing, but I do reference the music, dancing. You know, there's a part where Jessica and James are traveling by train past Rocky Neck, and they notice in Connecticut, and they notice this, because this is one of my favorite places, a stone, well, it was a dance hall, recreation hall. And they mentioned something about, you know, it's being romantic. And James says, yes, I seem to remember something about someone doing Glenn Miller and my having a dark-haired beauty in my arms, you know. So I reference it. There are scenes. I had one scene in the first novel where, or maybe it was, I can't remember if it's the first novel or the second novel, where Jessica is dancing with a friend who's concerned about her sister, and they're doing everything. They're listening to, I forget which song it is, but it's a rumba. So I describe the movements in the rumba and how they come together and talk during that. So I do try to work in, the music to some extent. I have to say this novel, I actually was influenced by Debussy. A lot of some of his music, like The Sea and Clouds. Oh, I just was joined by one of my cats here, and you may hear a meow. That's Natasha.
Let's see a cat.
Oh, I'm not sure I can get her. Tasha,
Is he gone?
she's right here. I have to. Okay, hold on. I'll try to pick her up. She's pretty heavy. I'm sorry. Oh, here we go. This is Natasha.
Hello, Natasha.
This is Natasha. Yeah. She's
Yeah.
one of my good girls. We have two cats, Natasha and Rosalind. Yeah, this is Natasha. She's a tuxedo cat. Okay.
So she is.
Thank you. She's a good girl, usually. Usually, huh? You usually a good girl?
Yeah.
So all right, we got to get down now. All right, no food involved. You got to get down. Okay. But always play the dark horse. It was also influenced by, what's his name? Jean Renoir's film, Woman on the Beach, which is also a Joan Bennett movie. And I have to say, there are a couple of scenes that are almost an homage in some of the dialogue to that film. So if you watch the movie and then you read the book, you can go, oh, I know where she got that. Especially the scene where Jessica is on the beach near the wreck. There's an old wreck, and she first meets Phil. And their interchange about ghosts and about the past and about, dealing with the past in one's ghosts. Although he seems a bit better adjusted than Robert Ryan, although I kind of based him on Robert Ryan in that movie. So again, I like to do those kind of homages, but the feeling of the novel, it's kind of like a haunting, eerie, a summer's twilight time. It really, if you want to think of summer, you read this book. It's a good summer read, or if it's in the middle of winter and you want to feel you're back in the summer, I try to capture the feel of that season. So
that's the Always Bet on the Dark Horse book?
yes, always play the dark horse.
Always play the dark horse.
Right. And it's a pun because there is literally a dark horse. Horse racing comes in, so betting. But if you play a dark horse, the British slang for dark horse, as I understand it, from what I've been reading and talking to other people, I mean, here we tend to think a dark horse is just somebody we don't know. But in the British slang has a slightly more negative connotation. It's someone who could be dangerous because you don't know him.
Mm.
So I thought it just came to me, this would be a great title. And, there are people playing the dark horse, whether they're not, or if you bet on the dark horse, then you may find the truth. So always play the dark horse. And as I said, my husband did the cover.
So what is the British slang for that?
The dark horse,
Oh, it's
call someone a
also the
horse.
dark horse in British, but it has a slightly different.
Slightly negative connotation.
Huh.
Oh, and interestingly enough, I know one of Joan Bennett's grandchildren on Facebook, and he said, "Oh, that looks just like Donnie," because they used to call her, the grandkids called her Donnie. That looks just like Donnie on the cover. He didn't say she approved, but I got the impression she would. So that was
That's great.
thanks. Yeah, that's fun. Yeah.
Yeah, I was when you were describing the beach, I was thinking about
Yeah.
Renee Claire's "And Then There Were None" too.
I don't think I know that.
It's
wait a
on
minute.
YouTube.
Oh no, that's the one. I didn't realize it was Renee Claire. That's Barry Fitzgerald and Lewis
Yeah.
Hayward. Yes,
Yeah.
yes, you're right. You're right.
Yes, of all people to make that Renee Claire, but yeah, he did.
Yeah. Well, French name, I guess.
Uh-huh.
Well, and then Debussy influenced me when I was reading it.
Yeah.
When I listen to music, often I like to create a movie with it. So I run the imaginary scenes in my mind, and a lot of some of his music influenced how I created moments. Like there's a moment kind of early on where they have the people on the campus have a cookout, and then Jessica, and there's kind of a haunting scene where they're playing music and James plays the clarinet. I thought if I had him play the flute, that would be a little too close to the original. So, and I have a couple of friends who play clarinet. So I thought, and that would be a suitably 1930s, 1940s instrument for someone to play. So he's playing Shenandoah, and a friend has a guitar, and they're doing that. And then Jessica wanders off later for a walk, and that's where she runs into the old boyfriend again, and there's an interesting conversation there. And then her husband shows up, and then there's one point where the two guys are arguing, and well, I think Jessica should do this, and I think Jessica should do that, and Jessica says, Jessica's right here, and this is what she thinks she should do. So
Yeah.
yes, right. So you liked that moment.
Okay.
Yeah.
So who are you reading now? Who are you reading?
Who am I reading? Well, and one of the things is I'm rereading this book so I can talk intelligently. I just read a book called The Earl of Crown Heights, which is written by, it's a memoir, and it's written by Shirley Carter. She's a member of my parish, and she also is, I know her from Worcester State too, because she's in the chorale, and she is an extraordinary woman. Her first memoir was called Colored, of course, and she grew up very poor in Worcester. But she and her sister Audrey were two of the first Black people to go to Worcester nursing school in the 50s, early 50s. She raised a family. She earned a PhD in education. She has done she's just done a lot to help people. And I always think of her and her sister Audrey as kind of like, they make me think of my aunts because they talk like Lowell Yankees. And she said, well, that's because we're Black Yankees. So we all talk like that. I said, yeah. Well, and they're just, I always love to see them. And she's just a marvelous writer. So that, and I just finished reading before that, Emmeline, an late 18th century novel by Charlotte Smith. And I like her poetry a lot better than her novels. She probably ended, yeah.
I must say, Emmeline actually reeks. I read it once because I
Yeah.
was,
It's good, but it could be 200 pages shorter, right?
yeah.
Yeah, she's a little too many. And then this person comes, and then that person comes in. I mean, I love her poetry. I used to teach her poetry when I taught women poets and when I taught the Romantics and when I taught Survey of 19th Century. And Wordsworth, she was one of his favorite poets. He really admired her.
I did not know she wrote poetry.
Oh yes, her sonnets are great. Her sonnets are wonderful. Read her sonnets.
Oh, well.
And then she wrote another poem. Is it called When We're 42 or When We're 18? It's very funny. It's about, she's talking about she and her friend who, when they were such and such an age, thought life would go on forever in a certain way. And when they were in their 40s, it'd be old ladies. And now that they're in their 40s, well, they won't be old ladies for another 20 years.
Sounds familiar.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much, Sharon.
Oh, you're welcome.
This was
And
fun.
hold up the book once more.
Oh, yes. Here it is. Always play.
Sharon Healy-Yang's Always Play the Dark Horse. And it's out now.
Sharon Healy.
Thank you.